Thank you. Look, I know that many of us in this room are still reeling from what happened on October 7th. My wife, Apurva, and I are reeling too. Two of our closest friends, Dana and Mark, were in Jerusalem for Sukkot. We were exchanging text messages with them in real time as they took cover at the bomb shelter in their hotel. I know many of you lost loved ones that day or know close friends who did. And even worse, right here at home now, Jewish Americans now suffer in the United States of America as our fellow Americans throw salt on their wounds. We hear the bone-chilling story of a new anti-Semitic attack in this country almost daily. From the Jewish students at Cooper Union, who were locked in the school library as pro-Palestinian demonstrators pounded down the door, to the Israeli students at Harvard Business School, my alma mater at Harvard, and Columbia, who were violently attacked after peacefully confronting those who disagreed with them. Our friends in New York City say they've told their young sons to take off their yarmulkes when they walk on the street. Jewish schools remain closed for fear of attacks. That is not America. We're a nation where every Jew and every American deserves to be safe, to be free to worship, to be free to be who you are without fear. Thank you. That is the America I know. But it's no surprise how we got here. I actually wrote a book about this a few years ago, Woke Inc. It is the inevitable result of this self-loathing, anti-American woke orthodoxy that has pervaded our universities, our companies, and nearly every major institution across this country over the last decade. History teaches us that anti-Semitism is actually a symptom of a deeper cultural malaise. And I believe the left-wing woke cancer was always destined to end in the destination of anti-Semitism. I said this in my book several years ago. Now you look today, a recent poll finds that Gen Z is divided 50-50 on whether they support Hamas or Israel. Young people in this country are lost. I am 38 years old. I am the first millennial ever to run for U.S. president. I can tell you what's going on in our generation. They are hungry for purpose, for meaning, for a cause, for identity. And for a generation, we've taught them to fill that hunger by going to Ben & Jerry's and ordering a cup of ice cream with some anti-Semitic sprinkles on top. It's no surprise they're now spewing back that same anti-Semitism coming out of their mouth in reverse. So with all of that said, let me relieve some of the tension in this room this morning by calling out an elephant in this room. Many of you have heard my policy views described by the press as unfriendly to Israel. Some have even described me and my views as anti-Israel. That's dead wrong. We have enough anti-Semitism in this country that we don't need to artificially manufacture more of it. My message to you this morning will be, I believe, the most pro-Israel vision that you will hear today, but it's not going to take the form of standard GOP-approved talking points. Over a decade ago, I was recruited by Rabbi Shmuley Hecht at Yale to join Shabtai, the Jewish society on campus. I was the first Hindu and one of the only non-Jews to be recruited. And I ended up becoming one of its most involved members, and in recent years, one of its largest alumni supporters. I learned a lot from Shmuley at Yale during my time at Shabtai. I learned that native-born Israelis are called sabras, which is Hebrew for the leaf of the prickly pear cactus, a tough, thorny exterior with a sweet and kind interior. I saw that firsthand on my first trip to Israel a decade ago to meet the family who became the first investor in my company. The family and I had an instant connection because it turns out that I shared something in common with them, something that I've shared in common with most of the Israelis I've ever met since. We are a candid people, brutally candid. I'll be brutally candid with you today. Let me start by quoting David Ben-Gurion, the founder of modern Israel as we know it. He had a thorny exterior. He was candid. And here's what he had to say to the West in the aftermath of the Holocaust. What have you done to us, you freedom-loving peoples, you defenders of high principles of democracy? What have you allowed to be perpetrated against a defenseless people while you stood aside and let it bleed to death without offering help? Why do you profane our pain with wrath and empty expressions of sympathy, which ring like mockery? He was pissed. The Jews relied on the sympathies of those who proclaimed to love freedom, yet those who preached it, even here in America, did not practice it to help the Jews in Europe until it was in their interest and necessity to do so. So he had a vision of what to do about it. While Europe grappled with the so-called Jewish question, he delivered the Jewish answer. It's called Israel. God told Abraham that Israel was for his descendants through Isaac. The 450 million descendants of Ishmael have over 20 internationally recognized states. It is only right to have one for the Jewish people. That's a fact. Our future does not depend on what the Gentiles will say, this is what Ben-Gurion said, but on what the Jews will do. The fate of Israel depends on two things, he said, its strength and its righteousness. And he said that Israel must win every single war that it fights because our enemies only have to win one war. Oseh shalom bimromav hu yaseh shalom alenu. He who makes peace above should grant peace on earth. But that peace requires strength to last. That was David Ben-Gurion's vision. He was exactly 5 feet tall, but he was a mighty man. The nation he founded is 9 miles narrow today, but it is a mighty nation. Never again would Israel's existence depend on the fleeting sympathies of others. Never again would the Jewish people fall for the siren song of the West's proclamation for freedom in words, but not in deed. Never again. Israel's strength at long last would come from within its own nation, built on the land that God promised Abraham. Well, on May 14th, 1948, Israel declared its independence. And later that same day, 5 Arab countries invaded Israel in hopes of killing the infant nation. Young Israel had a population of under 700,000. Think about that. Fighting 5 Arab invader countries with over 40 million. Young Israel, back then, think about this, was armed with 3 tanks, 0 planes, and not enough guns even for all of its soldiers to have one. The Arab armies boasted 270 tanks, 300 plus airplanes. But Israel won that war. Now, 1% of Israel's population died doing it, nearly 1/3 of whom were survivors of the Holocaust, but they won the war. By the way, using some of the very same weapons that were used to round up Jews in Nazi Germany, that were later used to save the Jewish state in the Middle East. In the coming decades that followed, Israel and its Arab neighbors would go to war again and again. The 6-Day War of 67, the Yom Kippur War of 73, and Israel fought and won every one of those wars. They were costly victories. But as Ben-Gurion said, Israel must win every single war that it fights because our enemies only have to win one war. And that brings us to the tragedy of October 7th. The Hamas attacks were barbaric. They were medieval. They were subhuman. The first civilian to die at Kibbutz Be'eri, maybe the first civilian to die in the Hamas attacks at all, was Arik Kraunik, the kibbutz's chief security officer. Armed with just a rifle and a pistol, he killed 7 Hamas attackers at the gate before more terrorists took him down. On that same kibbutz, Renat and Chen Evan took their family and jumped from their burning home. They landed in what they thought was safety, but the Hamas terrorists soon shot them. Renat, Chen, and their 2 oldest children shielded their 2 youngest children with their bodies. Only those 2 youngest children survived. In another kibbutz, a young mother named Adi Vital Kaplun had to make a terrible choice. Hamas terrorists were in her home. She knew it was too late for her. So she called her husband and her father to warn them not to come to the house. She was soon shot dead in front of her 2 children, a 4-year-old and a 4-month-old. These are 3 stories amongst over 1,000 like them. David Ben-Gurion said at Israel's founding, the most dangerous enemy to Israel's security is the intellectual inertia of those who are responsible for security. Here's a hard truth. There's no doubt that there was some intellectual inertia within Israel's modern military and intelligence that allowed for a failure of those defenses that allowed October 7th to happen. And there is also a role for the U.S. to admit. The long-standing relationship and alliance between the U.S. and Israel is special. Decades, thank you, it is true. Goes to the heart of who we are as a people. Decades of intelligence sharing, shared democratic values, co-development of defense technologies, including the Iron Dome itself, which was helpful on that day. But whatever military aid the U.S. provided to Israel for the last 10 years did absolutely nothing to prevent that breach, which was the worst attack that Israel has faced in 50 years, possibly ever in its history. And I think it is at least reasonable to ask the question of whether the supposedly protective blanket that the U.S. provided may have in a small way contributed to the intellectual inertia of Israel's own defenses. That might be a question that David Ben-Gurion would ask if he were alive today. The U.S. and Israel, we share a vital interest in making sure that Iran never, ever acquires a nuclear weapon. And it is utter lunacy that the Biden administration made a $6 billion ransom payment to Iran, which not only calls for the death of Israel, but calls for death to America. Yet against that backdrop, here's the part you won't hear from others, but I'm here to speak hard truths. It is also sheer lunacy for the U.S. to have advanced discussions this summer about the transfer of nuclear technology to Iran's Sunni rival, Saudi Arabia, which, while more accommodating than Iran is, of course, towards the U.S. and Israel, absolutely should not become a nuclear power either. That's a fact. And here's a harder truth. We're seeing this by the day as the news comes out, but we have to confront the truth if we're going to find our way forward. There's almost no doubt that the October 7th attacks on Israel were, at least in some small way, in part the result of that disastrous maneuver by this Biden administration. That is a hard truth that we as Americans must confront, that some of our poor decisions may have played a role in catalyzing the October 7th attack on our most important Middle Eastern ally, even though that is not a particular. These are all part of the backstory of how October 7th actually happened. We can't just spout the slogans that we're supposed to say in public. We have to confront the truth, not when it's easy, but when it is hard, when it is difficult, and in this case, when it is at times ugly. Which brings me to the truth of what to do about it. My view is that now is the moment for Israel to return to its founding premise. The Jewish state has an absolute right to exist. A divine gift, gifted to a divine nation, charged with a divine purpose. Israel has an absolute and unequivocal right and responsibility to defend itself to the fullest, applying the only language that its adversaries understand, the language of force. So what would David Ben-Gurion say today? He would say, don't depend on anybody else's fleeting sympathies or permission to do it. If Israel wants to destroy Hamas, Israel should go ahead and destroy Hamas. I'm just getting started. If Israel wants to destroy Hezbollah, Israel should go ahead and destroy Hezbollah. If Israel and Mossad want to pull off Munich 2.0 and take out every last leader of Hamas, wherever they may be hiding from Doha to Dresden, host a red wedding at the Four Seasons in Qatar, the next time Haniyeh and Mashal show up, they should go ahead and do it. If Israel wants to, at long last, abandon the myth of a two-state solution, Israel should go ahead and abandon a two-state solution. The rest of the Arab world can absorb Palestinians just as the Jews absorbed their people out of 22 countries they were kicked out of since 1948. The Islamic world cannot continue to condone the slaughtering of Jews while continuing to disown the Palestinians. That is the hard truth, that neither member of either political party is willing to speak out loud to the Arab world. I will. But these are decisions for Israel to make, not America. I am not running for president of Israel. I am running for president of the United States. And just as it is time for Israel to return to its founding premise, it is time for us here in the U.S. to return to ours. George Washington, in his 1796 farewell speech, David Ben-Gurion is to Israel as George Washington is to this country. He reminded us that our job here is to be strong at home, to mind our own affairs, to avoid foreign military entanglements that do not relate directly to our homeland here in the United States of America. It's okay. I'm sharing my honest view, and we have to have open debate to find the path forward. I am a George Washington, America First conservative. And I believe the U.S.-Israel relationship is strongest when it is grounded in American self-interest, as I believe it is and will be strongest when it is, not in fleeting sympathy. That is better for America. That is better for Israel. And I will remind you that President Trump was wrongly criticized as anti-Semitic during his campaign and early on in his presidency, but went on to do more for Israel in a few short years than most presidents who have spouted off the right slogans. I don't spout slogans to you all either. And under my watch, we're going to do the same thing and go even further. Take the Abraham Accords to new heights. Lead the way without apology. By the end of my first term, I am fully confident that our relationship with Israel will be stronger than it has ever been because, yes, we are both Sabras. So what does that mean for U.S. involvement now? It means we support Israel to the fullest, with a diplomatic Iron Dome that allows Israel to fully defend its national existence without anybody else. Not the U.S., not the UN, not Europe, not anybody standing in Israel's way. It means publicly condemning and rejecting the shameful comments of the UN Secretary General this week, who tried to justify the Hamas attack by creating a false equivalence between the attacks on Israel and the Palestinian peoples, that terrorist attacks on Israel versus their defense. Forget that. Tell the UN it means the U.S. should stop funding and, if necessary, altogether exiting these pathetic institutions like the UN that are hostile to our sovereignty of the U.S. and our allies. It means we share intelligence with Israel required to achieve its goals. It means we speak out against anti-Semitism right here at home, not by censorship of speech, but through leadership of our young Americans who follow the Pied Pipers of anti-Semitism because they are truly lost for purpose and meaning, because anti-Semitism is almost always a symptom of a deeper moral and spiritual void that true leaders have to fill. It means we shore up our own military-industrial base here in the U.S. in a manner that improves U.S. security, and we can sell arms to Israel in a manner that advances the interests of both countries. But from a U.S. standpoint, I worry that we muddy the waters and we hamstring both the U.S. and Israel if we engage militarily ourselves. I don't want to repeat the mistakes that we have made in the last 25 years, accumulating debt, thousands of innocent American lives lost in Middle Eastern wars that did not advance the U.S. interests in Iraq or Afghanistan. I don't think it's in Israel's interest for the U.S. to get involved militarily, and I don't think it's in the American interest either. From a U.S. standpoint, here's the right path forward. Get Americans out of harm's way. I personally funded a 200-seat charter flight to get Americans in Israel out of danger. The Biden administration needs to do better on this front and more. I believe that we have to do better in every respect. We have to think about how we get Americans, our troops, out of places like Syria and Iraq, where they never should have been in the first place. Force Hamas to release any remaining American hostages before a broader war begins. The American first agenda means no American left behind. Get our sons and daughters out of those places, like Syria and Iraq, where there's no place for them to be in the first place, and where they're sitting targets today. And in the meantime, I will be clear that if you hit us, we will hit you back 10 times harder. That's a principle in America. We will be crystal clear with Iran that you better not get involved in this conflict in backing this war against Israel. And as long as Iran doesn't intervene, we won't either. We will be crystal clear with the UN and the rest of the world that Israel is free to defend itself to the fullest, using whatever means Israel determines to be in its national self-interest. Now, right now, today, this Saturday morning, as we convene in this room, Jews are convening in the synagogues of the world and reading this week's Lech Lecha from Genesis. And the Lord said to Abraham, go forth from your land and from your birthplace and from your father's house to the land that I will show you. And I will make into you a great nation, and I will bless you, and I will aggrandize your name, and you shall be a blessing. And I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you I will curse. And all the families of the earth shall be blessed in you. And the Lord appeared to Abraham, and he said, to your seed I will give this land. And there he built an altar to the Lord who had appeared to him. Israel is still that great nation. We bless this great nation, our friend and our ally. Israel, we believe in your birthright. And I have full confidence that if left unrestrained, the IDF will be able to get the job done of defending Israel. I know they can do it. I personally hope for a successful in-and-out operation. I would love nothing more than for the IDF to put the heads of the top 100 Hamas leaders on stakes and line them up on the Israel-Gaza border as a sign that October 7, 2023 will never happen again, and then to use all of those saved resources to build the border defenses of the future. But that is Israel's decision to make, not ours. That is what David Ben-Gurion would tell Israel to do. That is what George Washington would tell the United States to do. And I will close with the words that Menachem Begin spoke to Joe Biden in 1982. I am not a Jew with trembling knees. I am a proud Jew with 3,700 years of civilized history. Nobody came to our aid when we were dying in the gas chambers and ovens. Nobody came to our aid when we were striving to create our country. We paid for it. We fought for it. We died for it. We will stand by our principles. We will defend them. And when necessary, we will die for them again. Israel, we are with you. We are praying for you. We have real work to do here in the meantime. We will make sure those students at Cooper Union don't have to hide in a locked library for fear of violence, that the Jewish day schools don't have to stay closed for fear of attacks, that young boys in New York City will no longer have to take off their yarmulkes when they walk on the streets, but that they can be proud of who they are and achieve their dreams without fear. Internationally, we will make sure that nobody stands in Israel's way as you defend your land to the fullest. But now it's up to you to do what you have always done. Go win this war and protect your homeland without asking anybody for permission or anybody for forgiveness. And go make David Ben-Gurion proud. Thank you all. May God bless you. God bless Israel. And God bless our United States of America. Thank you. Thank you.